Daniel Green was the type of man who seemed destined for greatness. A dedicated police officer with a reputation for integrity and commitment, he had spent years serving the community in Exeter, California. His colleagues admired his work ethic, and his friends respected him as a loyal and dependable individual. In 2010, when he met Erika Sandoval, it felt like his life was finally falling into place. Their relationship blossomed quickly, a whirlwind romance that promised to be the beginning of a new chapter in Daniel's life. Erika, a bright young woman with aspirations of becoming a nurse, captivated Daniel with her charm and beauty. She was vibrant, full of energy, and seemingly perfect for him. For Daniel, their connection felt like fate, and he soon found himself drawn to her in a way he had never experienced before. They shared many of the same values: a love for family, a strong sense of responsibility, and a desire to build a future together. It didn't take long for the couple to decide to marry, and in 2010, they were wed, their future seemingly secure. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect union, tensions were quietly building. The passion that had once fueled their relationship quickly began to fade, replaced by underlying resentment and unspoken frustrations. What started as a fairy tale marriage soon devolved into a battleground. The intensity of their arguments grew, often escalating to destructive levels. Erika, though charming and loving in public, began to reveal a different side of herself behind closed doors. As time went on, Daniel began to notice subtle changes in his wife. Erika's behavior grew more erratic and unpredictable, with angry outbursts becoming more frequent. She became increasingly possessive and jealous, questioning Daniel's every move and suspecting him of infidelity, even when there was no evidence to support her claims. In response, Daniel's patience wore thin. He began withdrawing from her emotionally, trying to escape the constant tension that seemed to hang in the air. The accusations of emotional abuse on both sides only added to the strain. Daniel, who had always been committed to his career and his role as a protector, found himself on the receiving end of Erika's harsh words and bitter criticism. She, in turn, felt increasingly isolated and paranoid, convinced that Daniel's attention had shifted elsewhere. Their once harmonious home became a place of distrust and suspicion. In the midst of this turmoil, their son, Aiden, was caught in the middle. The tension between his parents grew so palpable that even a child could sense the unease. As a result, the couple's relationship became not just a struggle for emotional survival, but a fight for control. Control over each other. Control over their lives and control over Aiden's future. By the time 2012 rolled around, their marriage had reached a breaking point. The love that had once seemed so powerful had crumbled under the weight of unresolved conflicts, distrust, and resentment. In January 2012, Daniel and Erika made the decision to divorce, hoping that separation would finally allow them both to move on and find peace. But the divorce did little to resolve the issues between them. If anything, it only made the situation worse. The legal proceedings surrounding the custody of Aiden further deepened their animosity. What was once a shared dream of building a family together now became a bitter, drawn-out battle. Each party fought for control, each convinced that they were the better parent for their son. Despite the separation, Daniel and Erika remained bound to each other, unable to break free from the venomous bond they had created. The divorce did nothing to sever the emotional ties that had been formed over the years. Instead, it fueled their conflict, making it even more personal and volatile. Erika's feelings of abandonment and betrayal grew stronger, while Daniel's desire to protect his son intensified. For Erika, the separation was far from the end. She couldn't let go of the relationship, and she couldn't let go of the anger that had built up inside her. Daniel had moved on, But Erika's resentment festered. She became increasingly obsessed with their past and determined to reclaim some semblance of control over the life she had lost. The pressure of unresolved emotions, coupled with her growing paranoia, began to weigh heavily on her mind. A storm was brewing, and no one, not even Daniel, could see it coming. As the months went by, Erika's obsession with their fractured family dynamic intensified. She could not accept the reality of their separation and the life that Daniel was beginning to build without her. The jealousy, fear, and anger she had harbored for so long began to take root in dangerous ways. She felt as though she had nothing left to lose. For Daniel, life continued to move forward. He focused on his work as a police officer, hoping that time would heal the wounds caused by the divorce. But little did he know, the woman he once loved and trusted was no longer the person he had married. Erika had changed, and the cracks in their relationship had given way to a dangerous obsession. The simmering tension between them reached its boiling point on February 6, 2015. What began as an ordinary night would soon turn into a nightmare that no one could have predicted. Daniel, unaware of the storm brewing just outside his door, would soon pay the ultimate price for a love turned deadly. February 6, 2015 began like any other quiet evening in Goshen, California. The sun had long set, and a cool, crisp air settled over the small town. Inside the modest home of Daniel Green, a respected former police officer, the evening appeared to be an ordinary one. Daniel, accustomed to the daily grind of work and responsibility, had returned home after a long day. After a quick dinner, he sought the solitude of his bathroom, a space where he could unwind and let his mind drift away from the tensions of the outside world. Unbeknownst to him, however, danger was closing in, and the serenity he had sought was about to be shattered in the most violent way imaginable. He sat, completely unaware, his mind at ease, a sense of normalcy surrounding him as he carried out what seemed like an ordinary task. The hum of the house was interrupted only by the faint sound of the bathroom fan and the occasional creak of the floorboards, but this moment of peace would be the last he ever experienced. Outside, Erika Sandoval, Daniel's ex-wife, was making her way toward the house. It had been over 3 years since their divorce, but the bitterness and resentment between them had not faded. If anything, the years of separation had only heightened the emotional scars that Erika had carried with her. The custody battles for their son, Aiden, had been contentious, and despite the passage of time, Erika could not shake the sense of injustice and anger she felt. She had never fully come to terms with the breakdown of her marriage and Daniel's. Life had continued on without her, while hers had been left in a constant state of turmoil. The culmination of this pent-up rage and betrayal had been building for months, if not years. Erika's mind was consumed with thoughts of Daniel's perceived mistreatment of their son, Aiden. She had convinced herself that Daniel was a danger to their child, that his actions were harmful, and his behavior toward Aiden was damaging. It was a belief that consumed her, a belief that distorted her perception of reality. And then she discovered something that seemed to confirm her darkest fears: explicit material on Daniel's devices. It was the last straw for Erika. It fueled the fire of her rage, twisting her already fragile state of mind into something far more dangerous. She was no longer thinking rationally. Instead, she was driven by a consuming desire to act, to regain control of the situation that had spiraled out of her hands. Her emotions, clouded by jealousy, anger, and fear, took the reins of her actions. On that fateful night, she decided that she could not allow Daniel to continue living freely. She would take matters into her own hands, believing that in doing so she was protecting her son from a man she now viewed as a threat. Erika, determined and resolute, armed herself with a 9mm handgun. The weapon was cold and heavy in her hand as she drove to Daniel's home. Her thoughts raced, but the decision was made. There would be no turning back. The drive to Daniel's house was short, but every moment seemed to stretch out before her. The city lights blurred outside her window, but inside her mind there was a singular focus. The man she once loved, now the target of her rage. As she arrived at the house, Erika parked her car out of sight and walked quietly toward the door. Her footsteps were muffled by the sound of her pounding heart, but she didn't stop. There was no hesitation in her movements. She had a purpose, and she was determined to see it through. Reaching the front door, Erika paused for a moment. Her breath was shallow, her hands slightly trembling, but the storm inside her was too powerful to stop. She pushed open the door, slipping inside without a sound. She knew the layout of the house well. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway. She moved quickly but cautiously, her mind still racing with thoughts of what she was about to do. Inside the bathroom, Daniel was completely unaware of the impending danger. He sat on the toilet, lost in his own thoughts, his back turned to the door. He had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. He was still reeling from the emotional wounds of his past with Erika, but he had tried to put that chapter behind him. As Erika approached, she took one last deep breath, holding the weapon firmly in her hands. Her pulse quickened as she lifted the gun, her heart hammering in her chest. For a moment she hesitated, a fleeting thought, a shadow of doubt flashed in her mind. But it was gone as quickly as it came. The anger and the hurt that had been building for so long now took full control. She was convinced this was the only way to resolve the torment she had been carrying. With no warning, she pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the house, breaking the silence in a brutal and final way. Daniel had no time to react, no chance to defend himself. The first bullet struck, followed by several more, each one piercing him with deadly force. He crumpled to the floor, lifeless, his body collapsing in a heap on the bathroom tiles. Erika stood over him for a moment, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Her body was tense, her hands still gripping the gun. It was done. The man who had once been her husband, the man who had helped create the life they had shared, was now dead. The cold finality of the act began to sink in, but it wasn't regret or sorrow that Erika felt. It was something else, something darker, as if she had finally been freed from a prison of her own making. She stared at his lifeless body, taking in the reality of what she had just done. Her pulse began to slow, the rush of adrenaline fading, and in that moment the weight of her actions began to set in. But there was no time for remorse, not yet. Erika quickly fled the scene, leaving Daniel's body behind, and disappeared into the night. It was a brutal, cold-blooded act, one that no one could have predicted. The life of Daniel Green, a man who had dedicated his own to protecting others, was extinguished in an instant. The tragedy would reverberate through the lives of everyone who knew him, and the consequences of Erika Sandoval's actions would be felt for years to come. The night of February the 6th, 2015, would go down in history as the night that changed everything, marking the violent end of a once promising life and the beginning of a long, painful journey toward justice. The trial of Erika Sandoval began in 2019, a highly anticipated and emotionally charged case that gripped the local community. The courtroom was filled with tense silence as the prosecution and defense prepared to present their arguments, each side eager to make their case in front of the jury. This was not just a trial for justice. It was a battle over the narrative of Erika's actions and whether or not she could be held accountable for the murder of her ex-husband, Daniel Green. The prosecution wasted no time in setting the stage for their argument. They painted a picture of Erika as a woman scorned, driven to commit a brutal act of violence out of jealousy and rage. They argued that the catalyst for the murder had been Daniel's newfound relationship with another woman, which he had publicly displayed on social media. According to the prosecution, Erika had been consumed by envy and resentment, watching from the sidelines as her ex-husband moved on with his life while she remained mired in the past, emotionally and psychologically trapped. The prosecution's case was based on the premise that Erika's actions were impulsive. They presented evidence showing that Erika had been increasingly obsessive about Daniel's life after their divorce. She had been calling him repeatedly, trying to re-establish a connection that he had clearly moved on from. But when she saw the photo of Daniel with his new girlfriend, it was the breaking point. The moment when all of Erika's pent-up emotions, frustration, and jealousy exploded in a violent outburst. The prosecution argued that her desire for revenge had been so overwhelming that she decided to take matters into her own hands, believing that it was the only way to regain control over her fractured world. The gunshot that ended Daniel's life was not the result of an emotional breakdown. It was an act of calculated fury, and Erika's motive was plain: jealousy and the bitter pain of abandonment. As the prosecution laid out its case, Erika's defense team worked hard to counter this portrayal. They reframed the narrative, painting Erika as a victim, a woman who had endured years of emotional and psychological abuse at the hands of her ex-husband. The defense argued that the real story was not one of jealousy, but one of profound suffering, a woman pushed to the brink by the trauma of her past. They claimed that Erika's mental state had been deteriorating for years, exacerbated by the constant tension between her and Daniel after their divorce. They pointed to the custody battles, the emotional manipulation, and the financial struggles as factors that wore Erika down, ultimately leaving her with no way to cope with the overwhelming pressure. In this version of events, the defense portrayed Erika's decision to shoot Daniel as the desperate act of a mother trying to protect her son. They argued that Erika believed Daniel posed a danger to Aiden, their son, and that this belief, however misguided, was enough to convince her that she needed to take drastic action. The defense emphasized that, far from being an act of calculated revenge, the shooting had been an impulse driven by fear for her child. According to the defense, Erika had reached the point of no return, where her emotional and mental state had shattered, and in a moment of despair, she believed that killing Daniel was the only way to stop him from harming Aiden. To further bolster their case, the defense presented evidence that Erika had been struggling with mental health issues, including depression and anxiety. They claimed that these mental health struggles, compounded by the unresolved trauma from her relationship with Daniel, had impaired her judgment and led to the tragic decision to take Daniel's life. They argued that she was not a cold-blooded killer, but a deeply troubled woman who had been driven to this extreme measure by years of unresolved emotional pain and fear for her son's well-being. As the trial wore on, both sides presented their arguments in full, and the emotional toll of the case became evident. The courtroom was often filled with tears, tension, and occasional outbursts from family members who had been personally affected by the events. The prosecution painted Daniel as a victim whose life was unjustly cut short by a woman who could not control her emotions. On the other hand, the defense fought tirelessly to make Erika appear as a victim herself, a woman whose life had been destroyed by years of emotional abuse and fear for her son's safety. By the time the case was handed over to the jury, both sides had made compelling arguments. But the question remained: was Erika Sandoval a woman driven by jealousy, or was she a victim of years of emotional torment pushed to a breaking point? After several days of deliberation, the jury was finally ready to return a verdict. Tensions ran high in the courtroom as everyone anxiously awaited the decision. The prosecution was confident that they had made their case, believing that the evidence of premeditated murder was undeniable. Meanwhile, the defense held on to hope that the jury would empathize with Erika's mental state and the years of emotional pain she had suffered. But when the jury returned to the courtroom, it was not with a verdict, but with a shock that reverberated throughout the entire courthouse. The jury was deadlocked, unable to reach a unanimous decision. One lone juror had remained unconvinced, refusing to vote for a guilty verdict. As a result, the judge declared a mistrial, much to the disbelief of the prosecution and the victim's family. The news of the mistrial hit hard. For Daniel Green's family, who had been hoping for justice for his untimely death, it felt like a crushing blow. They had come so close to seeing Erika Sandoval held accountable for her actions, only to have everything unravel at the last moment. The victim's family was left in limbo, unsure of what the future would hold. For Erika Sandoval, the mistrial meant a temporary reprieve. She walked out of the courtroom, a free woman, at least for the time being. The trial had ended without a clear resolution, and no one knew whether the case would be retried or if new charges would be brought against her. In the immediate aftermath, Erika seemed relieved, though she was acutely aware that her freedom was now a fragile thing. The mistrial did not mark the end of Erika's legal troubles. Although she was free for now, the case was far from closed. The prosecution had the option to pursue a retrial, and there was no guarantee that Erika's legal woes were behind her. The decision on whether to retry the case would rest with the district attorney's office, and they would have to weigh the odds of securing a conviction in light of the hung jury. For Erika, the uncertainty of her future loomed large. Though she had escaped conviction for the time being, the events of the trial had exposed her actions to the public in a way that could never be undone. The court of public opinion had already made its judgment, and while Erika may have walked free for now, the shadow of her crime would continue to haunt her. As the legal process dragged on, the Green family and the community waited, hoping for justice to prevail. Would Erika Sandoval ultimately face the full consequences of her actions, or would she continue to live in the aftermath of her violent decision? Only time would tell, but the impact of her actions on those left behind would echo long after the trial had ended.